Consider the room you're sitting in right now. You probably think of it as a container, right?
Yeah, like a box.
Exactly. Like a fixed, invisible box of emptiness. Your furniture, your device, you just happen to be taking up space inside of
Well,
that.
that's the default assumption.
But what if space isn't a place at all? What if it's merely this, temporary mathematical relationship between objects? And more importantly, what if you're currently trapped inside the entirely wrong type of space?
Which is, I mean, that framing completely upends how we orient ourselves in the universe.
It really does.
We are so conditioned to trust physical boundaries, Like we trust the resistance of a wooden desk when we knock on it. But viewing space as a rigid container is, well, it's a massive optical illusion, one that severely limits our understanding of where we can actually go.
For sure. So welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. I am really excited about this one. We are tackling a profound, genuinely perspective-shattering text from 2006.
Yes, the chapter Preaching Tao, Article 10, The Mysteries of Space.
Right, specifically the translation by Tao 1. And the mission for this deep dive is to totally dismantle how you, the listener, perceive physical reality, matter, and, well, the invisible gaps between literally everything.
And the central premise we're dissecting today is that the universe is, it's fundamentally empty. The author argues that the true magical experience of life.
I love that phrase, magical experience.
Right. It only unlocks when you realize that wherever your awareness reaches, that becomes your true home. Your actual physical location is, it's almost irrelevant.
Totally. But to even entertain that magical, expansive view of reality, the text demands that we do some serious demolition first. We have to deconstruct the physical stuff that supposedly fills up this universe.
We have to tear matter apart to see what it actually is, basically.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the author anchors this whole demolition in a core piece of wisdom from the Buddha, which is emptiness is not different from form, and form is not different from emptiness.
Which sounds very abstract until they prove it mechanically. The text takes us on this dizzying shift in scale. Yeah.
It points out that if you look at the Milky Way galaxy from Earth, it just looks like a faint, hazy cloud of gas.
Just a smudge in the sky.
Exactly. The solid planets and burning stars, they just blur into a smudge. So trying to understand the fundamental nature of matter by looking at the macro level completely fails. We have to zoom in.
But zooming into our solar system is still way too vast. The text tells us to go all the way down to a simple everyday object, a stone on the ground.
Right.
And I used to think about this process of breaking down matter like peeling an onion. You strip away the layers, molecules, atoms, down to the nucleus. But I realize that the analogy is totally flawed for this text, because when you peel an onion, you eventually hit a solid core. The process described in this source is much more like zooming into a high-definition 3D video game.
Oh, that is a much more accurate framework for what the author is describing. Yeah, because when you play a game, a stone looks completely solid and real. But if you zoom the camera in close enough, the high-resolution texture breaks down into flat polygons. Yeah, it gets all blocky.
Exactly. Zoom in further, and the polygons dissolve into a wireframe. Push past the wireframe, and you are literally just looking at lines of code. Pure math floating in a void.
And that is exactly what happens when the source dissects the physical stone. We blow past the basic chemistry of molecules and atoms, which, anyone familiar with basic physics knows is mostly empty space anyway.
Right.
We crack open the nucleus, bypass the protons and neutrons, and dive straight into the subatomic realm.
And the author provides a staggering list of what we find in that subatomic realm. Hadrons, mesons, baryons, leptons, bosons, photons, neutrinos, fermions, gluons, and quanta.
It's quite the list.
It is. But the crucial point here isn't to, memorize a glossary of particle physics. The point the author is making is about the fundamental nature of these particles. At this level of magnification, we completely lose track of what constitutes what.
Because they aren't physical objects anymore. Like a boson or a fermion isn't a tiny microscopic billiard ball.
Precisely. They are dimensionless point particles. They are basically localized excitations in invisible quantum fields.
Just math.
Right. They represent probabilities and mathematical interactions rather than actual physical substance. We are staring at the wireframe of the universe.
That's crazy to think about.
And the author highlights the sheer incomprehensible scale of this emptiness with a specific measurement, which is, if you took 1 trillion protons and lined them up in a perfectly straight line, that line would only measure 1 single millimeter.
1 trillion. 1 trillion of the foundational building blocks of matter, and it barely crosses the head of a pin.
Yeah.
So when you strip away every single material layer looking for the absolute base unit, like the cell of the cell of the cell, what is left is simply nothing. Emptiness.
Which logically dictates that emptiness is matter. They aren't two different states. They're identical. The solid desk you knock on is quite literally constructed out of emptiness.
It circles back flawlessly to the Buddha's wisdom. Form is emptiness. Now, I buy the quantum physics of that. I really do. But it creates a massive conceptual problem.
How so?
Well, if everything solid is mostly just empty fields holding together invisible, buzzing mathematical probabilities, then what exactly is the space between things?
Right, and the text provides a remarkably simple definition for that. Space is merely the distance between matter or the realm of matter.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is entirely defined by the objects within it. And regarding its size, the author states it is infinite, comparing its boundlessness to the endless digits that trail after the decimal point in pi. It literally cannot be enclosed.
So what does this all mean? I want to dig into that definition because the author uses a thought experiment with 2 tables that completely rewired how I picture distance.
Oh, the table analogy is great.
Yeah. Imagine putting 2 physical tables side by side so they're touching each other. The space between them is minuscule. But then you put one of those tables on a rocket and fly it to Mars.
Just casually ship a table to Mars.
Exactly, just normal moving day stuff. But now the space between those 2 specific tables has grown enormously. Then you transport that second table billions of light years away across the cosmos. The space between them has expanded infinitely.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of that thought experiment. Space is not being presented as a static stage where the tables are merely changing coordinates.
Right, it's not a grid.
Exactly. The size of the space is entirely dependent on the composition and distribution of the matter itself. Space stretches, shrinks, and shifts based purely on the relationship between objects.
It's a relational metric. It's like an invisible rubber band connecting the 2 tables. The rubber band doesn't exist independently of the tables. It only exists to describe the tension and distance between them.
That's a great way to put it. But that relational metric only applies to the visible universe. It describes the space we can measure with lasers, telescopes, and our own eyes. And the author argues emphatically that this is a severely limited, one-dimensional interpretation of reality.
We're only seeing half the picture.
Exactly. We are only looking at one half of the equation, which introduces the text's core thesis on multidimensional space.
Right, because the text claims that space actually comprises 36 distinct dimensions.
Yep. 36.
But thankfully, we don't need to get lost in the weeds of all 36 today because the author boils them all down to 2 primary fundamental attributes based on the Tai Chi principle.
And the Tai Chi principle fundamentally dictates that reality requires duality to function. You can't have light without shadow or an up without a down.
There's always a push and a pull.
Right. So applying this to the cosmos, the author divides all of existence into yang space and yin space.
Let's define the trap first.
Yeah.
Yang space is the physical realm. It's the universe we've been discussing up until now, the realm of planets, stones, tables, and protons. It is entirely composed of material substance, and it's what our scientific instruments are built to detect.
Well, yin space, representing the other half of that duality, is the non-material realm. It is the space occupied by consciousness, spirit, mind, divinity, memory, and dreams. Yeah, it is fundamentally devoid of physical matter.
And the author delivers this devastating critique of our obsession with yang space. Like, we spend billions of dollars building telescopes and rockets trying to conquer the physical universe.
Yeah, the space race, Mars rovers, all of it.
But the text calls yang space an insurmountable chasm. We are hopelessly trapped by the laws of physics, specifically the speed of light. The text bluntly reminds us that Earth is currently the only habitable place for us in the entire solar system.
And the limitations of yang space are entirely physical and logistical. Even if human engineering miraculously produced a ship capable of reaching a distant habitable star system, the text points out this really sobering socioeconomic reality.
Which is?
Ordinary people could never afford the ticket. Physical salvation would belong exclusively to the ultra-wealthy.
And here is where the text gets incredibly dark, but in a way that feels just uncomfortably true. It points out that even if you somehow secured a ticket, survived the generational trauma of deep space travel, and successfully landed on a lush, habitable exoplanet.
Right, against all odds.
You are still bound by biology. You will eventually just age and die on that new planet. The author writes, after all that effort, we would still end up dead. How pointless.
How pointless indeed. It forces a severe existential reckoning. The pursuit of conquering Yang space is ultimately an exercise in futility.
Yeah.
You are exerting astronomical amounts of physical and financial effort merely to change the geographic location of your inevitable death. You just cannot outrun mortality in a material universe.
It's incredibly depressing when laid out like that, to be honest.
Very.
But the text doesn't wallow in that existential dread. It uses the futility of Yang space to pivot to what it calls good news.
We love good news.
We really do. We don't have to remain prisoners of the physical realm.
Yeah.
We have an escape route. We can transition our exploration and our very existence into yin space.
And the mechanics of yin space offer complete liberation from the constraints we just discussed. Because yin space is non-material, movement within it is not bound by the speed of light.
No speed limits.
Exactly. Travel can be superluminal or even instantaneous. In a fraction of a second, your consciousness can bridge distances that would take a physical spacecraft billions of years to cross, reaching non-material planets on the other side of the cosmos.
And the author specifically names some of these destinations. There's the 1,000-year world and the 10,000-year world. They're described as profoundly beautiful material worlds that we can actually inhabit. The text posits a permeability between the dualities, claiming that yin and yang worlds can transform into each other.
And the method of travel to these worlds is probably the most radical concept in the text. You don't build a machine to get there. The vehicle is the mind itself, governed by the law that consciousness determines existence.
Okay, walk me through the actual mechanics of that. How does a thought transition into a physical arrival in a place like the 1,000-year world?
Well, it operates on the principle of resonance and frequency. The text suggests that the mode of your thinking literally determines your life form and the environment you inhabit. Every state of consciousness has a specific frequency. These distant, higher worlds also operate on specific frequencies. So if you elevate your internal state, your thoughts, your spiritual awareness, to match the frequency of the 10,000-year world, you resonate with it. Your consciousness naturally aligns with and travels to that environment.
Here's where it gets really interesting, but also where I have to push back a bit, because this is the exact moment where a lot of listeners are going to throw their hands up.
Oh, for sure. It sounds like a stretch.
It sounds incredibly utopian. A 10,000-year world and a celestial islands continent. Is this not just highly elaborate daydreaming? Like, what separates tuning your frequency to a magical island from just closing your eyes and pretending you aren't sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic?
Right, the escapism argument.
Exactly. How can the author claim these places actually exist outside of one's own imagination?
Well, the author fully anticipates that exact wall of skepticism. They understand that a mind entirely conditioned by the rules of yang space will just reject yin space as pure fantasy. To dismantle that skepticism, this 2006 text deploys a brilliant modern analogy to prove that non-material spaces are undeniably real.
They use the internet and virtual reality.
Yes. The argument begins with a universally accepted non-material space, which is dreams. We all dream, therefore we all acknowledge that a dream space exists even though it lacks physical mass.
Right.
But then the author pivots to computer networks. Think about it. Before the invention of the computer, if you told someone about virtual space, they would have dismissed it as occult nonsense.
Right, because there was no framework for a space that existed mathematically but not physically.
Exactly. But today, the existence of network space is an undeniable foundational truth of our daily lives. The text then poses a highly specific question. Is there a website called Lifechanyuan in the network space?
Well, if you open a browser, type in the URL, and hit enter, the website loads, the code renders into a space you can read and interact with. So for the person who visits it, the answer is an absolute yes.
But consider the person who has never heard of it, who has never typed in the URL. They might doubt its existence or be entirely ignorant of it. The author argues that the Celestial Islands continent in the Elysium world operates on the exact same logic. Just because you have not yet tuned your consciousness, your internal URL to access it, does not mean the space itself is fabricated. Lack of localized perception does not equate to non-existence.
That is a phenomenal defense.
Yeah.
If you refuse to use the interface, you can't claim the server is offline.
Yes, exactly.
And this brings us to the philosophical climax of the text, where the author actively blurs the boundary between what we consider an illusion and what we consider real.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it returns us directly to the Buddha's wisdom. If form is emptiness and the material world is essentially just vibrating quantum fields, then the distinction we make between a real physical desk and an illusory digital or mental desk is, well, it's fundamentally arbitrary.
Yeah.
The text insists that the illusory is real and the real is illusory.
And the author drives this home with a series of incredibly provocative questions, and I want to pose them directly to you, the listener. Imagine you're having a vivid, beautiful dream. Would you rather wake up to the anxiety, the sorrow, and the friction of human life? Or would you rather sustain a 10,000-year beautiful dream?
It completely challenges the intrinsic value we place on physical suffering.
It really does. And the text asks another comparative question regarding travel. Would you rather spend 6 months safely enjoying the most breathtaking scenery on Earth through a flawless virtual interface? Or would you rather spend a lifetime dealing with the exhausting logistics of physical travel?
Dealing with currency, borders, physical exhaustion, and danger, just to see the exact same geometry with your physical eyes.
Right. What difference does it actually make to your consciousness? If the emotional resonance, the memory, and the visual data are identical, why do we privilege the experience that requires physical exertion?
We privilege it because we are trapped in the mindset of yang space. We have been conditioned to believe that an experience is only valid if it pushes back against our physical bodies.
Wow.
Yeah, and the text is urging us to abandon that bias. It argues that valuing the conscious internal experience in yin space is not a retreat from reality, but an elevation of it.
This text essentially takes everything we think we know about reality and turns it inside out. We started by looking at a stone and realized that matter is just a fractal zoom into absolute emptiness.
Right.
We discovered that physical space isn't a box we live inside, but a flexible, stretching metric that only exists to measure the distance between objects.
And we analyzed the Tai Chi duality of the universe, recognizing the physical trap of yang space, a realm bounded by the speed of light, financial inequality, and unavoidable death. And against that bleak reality, we explored the infinite, instantaneous freedom offered by yin space.
We learned that consciousness is the ultimate vehicle. The author promises that grappling with these concepts unlocks the 8 great mysteries of life, leading directly to enlightenment.
And the text concludes with a rather beautiful poetic summary. The way of the celestials is joyful, and the great void is their home. It is a profound invitation to view your own mind, your intuition, and your imagination not as idle daydreaming, but as legitimate, valid exploration of the universe's yin space.
It really provides an incredibly rare validation of the inner life. Modern society demands physical output and tangible results. This text suggests that the boundless architecture of your internal world is not only as real as the physical universe, but infinitely more vast and far more worthy of your exploration.
It really does reframe what it means to be an explorer.
It does. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over something that builds on the author's VR analogy, but pushes it into our immediate future.
Okay, let's hear it.
So this text was published in 2006, right? An era when internet forums and early virtual spaces were just beginning to prove that non-material realities could hold weight for human consciousness.
Yeah, barely scratching the surface.
Exactly. But look at the trajectory of technology right now. We are standing on the precipice of advanced neural implants. We are developing hyper-realistic virtual physics engines that interface directly with the brain.
Mm-hmm.
If this text is entirely correct, if consciousness determines existence, and if the illusory is functionally identical to the physical mind, what happens a decade from now?
That's a wild thought.
What happens when technology allows our minds to seamlessly inhabit digital universes with zero physical effort? When you can plug into a simulation that feels mathematically and sensorially indistinguishable from knocking on a solid wooden desk,
Wow.
will we have accidentally artificially engineered the Elysium world that the text describes? Or will technology simply be the mechanical vehicle that finally allows the everyday person, the person who could never afford a physical rocket ship to Mars, to permanently step out of the physical trap of yang space and into the boundless superliminal freedom of yin space?
Wow. That is something to think about.
So the next time you knock on wood to assure yourself of reality, maybe ask yourself which world you're actually trying to wake up in.